Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Christopher Hodges. I'm the author of Noble Automation Now, a book on helping humans be heroes in the age of automation, and another book called Placing Stones, which is all about identifying a good professional balance that helps you succeed on multiple dimensions. And I bring that up because both of those books were inspired by the work of my guest today. And my guest is Steve Swavely. He is a leadership neuropsychologist. I met Steve in a professional capacity when I benefited from the program he led on helping leaders from across industries take their performance and impact to the next level. And that was more than 10 years ago. I have followed Steve and his work since then, and I'm thrilled to be able to personally talk with Steve again, but also to have Steve share his work and his insights on his upcoming book with those of you who are listening and watching the video today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Steve Swavely.
Wow, thanks for the invitation, Chris. I love talking about this topic, and so I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and chat with you.
Well, Steve, you and I obviously talk on and off. We're in some common groups together, and I love to hear you talking, whether it's to me or to the other people in the group. And I know everyone benefits from that. And I know your upcoming book is certainly going to help people see the full range of what you want to put forward. But I thought today would be a great idea just to cover some of those core topics. So if you don't mind, I pulled together some questions that I think might be relevant to the people who are involved in my world and my circle, maybe those who follow me on LinkedIn or who I follow on LinkedIn. So if we can just go through those, I thought we might start with the biggest picture. I introduced you as a leadership neuropsychologist. And I bet a lot of people on listening and watching are saying, what exactly is that? So my question for you is, what exactly is neuropsychology?
Well, that's a great question, and I get asked that all the time, particularly when I'm in front of a business audience. The best way for me to describe neuropsychology is to use the analogy of a computer. Think about the idea that neuropsychology is actually the combination of two sciences: the science of the brain and the science of the mind. Now, your brain is kind of like the computer itself: the silicone chips, the hard drive, the wiring, the motherboard, and your mind is like the programming that goes into the computer. And so neuropsychology is a study of those two disciplines. You need to understand the brain and the mind and how they operate together, just like you need to understand how a computer uses its programming to operate effectively. And that's essentially what neuropsychology is.
So Steve, let me ask you a question. When you separate the brain and the mind, you often hear, if you're a kid or if you're a parent or a grandparent, you hear the idea of nature and nurture. And I don't know that that's the same where we are in the same space here. But if you're saying that the brain is kind of something you were given when you were born, right? And that's the hardware of what you're saying. And then the mind is the software. Does that mean every single person has, of course, this very unique mix of how they were born, and then what the software they choose to or put into their brain? Is that kind of, you have to deal with everyone as a combination of software and hardware?
Yeah, I would say there are similarities in how we're all wired, and we can leverage those similarities. And there's also uniquenesses in how we're all programmed and wired. And so it creates this unique personality, if you will, that we bring into our leadership. And that's really what neuropsychology can do, is to help leaders understand their own personality, their own neuropsychology, as well as that of their followers.
Well, you're on to my next question. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, it's very easy when you listen to a subject you're very interested in to say, well, how does this relate to me specifically? Because you're having a conversation. But for you, since I've seen you, there have been thousands of leaders you've interacted with. I know it's thousands. And I know in my own capacity, they were from all kinds of different industries. So how do you see neuropsychology helping benefit leaders today? How can it make them more effective leaders?
Well, it's a great question, and I'll answer it this way. As a leader, you need to have two types of expertise. One expertise is the technical expertise that is relevant to your industry. If you're an engineer, then you got to have engineering expertise. If you're leading a team of engineers, you got to have that expertise. If you're an IT professional, it's good for you to have that expertise.
Sure.
No matter what industry you're in, you got to have that technical expertise. But there's a second level of expertise, or maybe a better way to describe it is a type of expertise that a leader needs, and that's relationship expertise. Because at its core, that's what leadership is. It's about getting things done through people, building relationships, and making those relationships a nucleus of a high-performing team.
Okay, now I'm really excited. So let's say you think of people who, when they make it into leadership jobs, they what do they call it? The Peter Principle. You get promoted to your first level of incompetence. And maybe that first level of incompetence only depended on, or to get there, depended only on that technical knowledge you were talking about. So how do you see neuropsychology? Obviously, you don't wait till you're the CEO to think about this, right? So how do you see that kind of the timing and the necessity and the impact of applying neuropsychology as much or more so than your technical expertise?
Yeah, it's. I think you hit the nail on the head. People typically get their leadership roles because of their technical expertise,
right?
And they lose those roles because of their lack of relationship expertise.
Right. You should say that as a takeaway. What did you say? They get it because of their technical expertise and they lose it because of their lack of neuropsychology?
Yeah, essentially that's right. Yeah.
Right.
Without that relationship expertise, you become a very limited limited effectiveness in your leadership. It's right. What you can do to build your team is going to be limited.
If we had a poll right now, an active poll, I would say, and raise your hand if you've ever worked for a person who had great technical expertise and horrible relationship expertise. Okay, 95% of the hands all go up. All right, Steve.
I'd posit that we'd probably get 100% of the people almost. Everybody's had a leader that
right
got in that role because they were great at what they studied in school and not so much in their capacity to build relationships.
Right. You know, the older you get, the more jobs you've had, something like that just resonates so clearly. So let me be specific. And let's say we've got a range of people listening and watching this interview, and they run from the first time the person's been a team manager of 5 or 6 people in their company up to someone who is just constantly polishing the blade and getting better and better. What are some of the specific areas, if you think, and you can address it from the early manager to the leader or however you want to address it, but what are some of the specific areas of leadership where neuropsychology brings the most leverage and the most impact?
Well, there are a lot of areas that neuropsychology can be applied in leadership. I like to focus on six that I think lay the foundation for a great leader. One of those, the very first one, is self-awareness. And by that, I mean, do you as a leader understand what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, what are your blind spots, and how do you compensate for those?
Sure.
Neuropsychology has a lot to offer there. So that's one. A second is, go ahead, you're going to ask a question?
I'm going to let you get through your list, but I'm going to come back probably to several of them. Okay,
sure.
I'll say it now, but I want you to come back, which is, how do they get that level of awareness if they've been given the feedback that maybe they don't have that level of awareness?
Yeah. And again, that's where neuropsychology, I think, can really help lay the foundation for effective leadership. We can come back and talk more about that.
Yeah, let's do that. Okay.
A second area where neuropsychology, I think, has a lot to offer is in helping leaders understand motivation. I get asked all the time, how do I motivate my team? And leaders are surprised to hear me say, you can't motivate anybody. Motivation is an internal state. A better question to ask is, how do I create an environment as a leader where my team will self-motivate? It's a subtle but important distinction. And neuropsychology has a lot to say about what that environment looks like.
So, I'm dying. Okay, I gotta ask. I'm sorry, I'm gonna interrupt your flow of consciousness. Hopefully, you got these captured. So there's the leader, comes into the team, has whatever, 10, 15 people, maybe hundreds, but direct reports, let's say somewhere like 10 direct reports. You're saying they can't motivate them. So, but the motivation is there and maybe not necessarily flourishing, if I understood that correctly. So what does the leader do to uncover or stimulate that underlying motivation that these people have?
Well, again, it's all about creating the right environment. And that's where neuropsychology has been so helpful. It's identified what I call the drivers of motivation. What are the characteristics of an environment that's motivating? And there are many of them. There is, like, for example, role clarity. Do I know what success looks like in my role? The
Sure.
more that I understand what success looks like, the more motivated I am. The more ambiguous it is, the more that I'm less motivated. I tend to withdraw. Another one is connectedness to the leader. Do you, as my leader, care about me as a person? Or am I just a cog in the wheel of the organization?
Right.
And the more that I feel like you're connected to me and that you have my best interests at heart, the more engaged I am. The more I feel like that you kind of have your own interests and you're in it for yourself, more disconnected I become. And those are just two of 7 or 8 drivers of an environment that a leader has the ability to maneuver and to leverage to create an environment that will motivate folks.
Okay, I'm intrigued, but we got to get on to 3. You had 6. I think you said 6 areas.
That's right.
So
That's
this is great. You got a great teaser. Now I want to know what the other areas are to question 2. But back to your list of 6.
Okay, yeah. So number 3 would be communication, the skill of communication. I love to tell this story. You may have even heard me tell it, Chris, but my dad was an aeronautical engineer, and he wanted me to be an engineer as well, but I didn't get the math thing. And he would sit down with me in the dining room and sit at the dining room table and help me with my math homework. And he would get so frustrated, and he would say, "Son, don't you get it? There's only 4 things you got to know how to do to be good at math: add, subtract, multiply, divide. That's it. That's all you can do." Well, of course, the problem is you got to know when to do what, when to add, when to subtract. And I didn't. That was a puzzling to me. Communication, Chris, is exactly the same way. There are 4 things that you can do when you communicate. You can explain, you can ask questions, you can listen, and you can give direction. The key is to know when to do what. When do I listen? When do I give direction? And so forth.
But wait, say those one more time. You said explain,
listen,
give direction,
ask questions, give direction.
Ask question, give direction. I've never heard someone say that. Those are the 4 things that you can do in communication, which makes perfect sense. But you're right.
Yeah,
it's all about the timing.
And it's all about, the formula. And neuropsychology can help leaders understand when to go into listening mode versus when to go into direction mode. And most leaders actually have it backwards, right? They go right into telling people what to do before they've prepared their brain for receptivity to the message they're trying to deliver.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, I could ask you 50 questions. I'm thinking, and maybe this resonates with where you would say, think about when you're giving someone feedback. They're doing their job, and that's probably one of the things that makes an environment where someone gets more motivated when they get positive and constructive feedback. But boy, are there a lot of different ways to give feedback. And it just occurred to me, if you got the explain and ask questions and listen in the wrong order, they're going to shut their ears and not listen to anything you said.
It's the number one reason people resist feedback, is because leaders don't go about it in the proper way. They
Right.
go about it backwards. Yeah, exactly.
You know, I
Exactly.
was on the receiving end recently of something just like that. We had this great meeting, and the person who was leading this particular thing we were working on just jumped straight into the critical. And I stopped her and I said, I don't know about anyone else on this call, but I kind of like to start with the positive, you know. And
Yep.
you could see she was kind of like, well, I'm going to get to the positive, right? But it all depends on the timing and the order.
Yeah, it
Right.
depends on the timing, the order, and and how you do it. You're either going to shut the person down to receive that feedback, or you're going to open them up.
Right,
And
right. Okay, so that
it,
was communication. That was, I think,
yep,
number 3, right? Was
that was number
communication.
3.
Okay.
Yep. Number 4 is building collaboration. A leader's job is to build collaboration. And most leaders are surprised to learn that there's a relationship between opposition, collaboration, and conflict.
What you said,
Opposition,
opposition, collaboration,
collaboration, and conflict.
Okay.
A leader, a great leader, will not only encourage opposition on their team, but they'll try to uncover it.
Okay.
Opposition leads to collaboration.
You got to explain that. Why are they trying to get that opposition?
Yeah. So opposition leads to collaboration. You can have no collaboration unless people are able to put their ideas into the pot and to stir it and to mix and to talk about what are the options here.
Right.
What are the things that I might be missing as a leader with a plan going forward? Give me some pushback on it. But you don't want that opposition to get into conflict, where now it's become personal. And now it's just me driving my agenda to be right or to get something done. And knowing how to be able to encourage opposition, to build collaboration without getting into conflict. Again, neuropsychology has so much to offer in that arena.
You know, when I was going through officer training, I was, as you may remember, I was active duty in the U.S. Navy for about 10 years. And I remember being told, and this was very important, it was like there was a poem or something that went to it. And it said, if the crew is bitching and complaining, but the work is still getting done, don't say anything, right? They need to do that. They're figuring out how to do it better, and they're, just barking things back and forth at each other, but stuff is getting done, right? So shut up, don't say anything. Yep. But if they're complaining and they stop working, now you got a problem, right? So that shifts to your, destructive. It's not just another opinion. It's, this is a stupid thing we're doing and I'm just stopping, right? And that's when you had to jump in. And when I first heard that, it just didn't make any sense to me. But now you've just given it a whole big dose of academic legitimacy. And it's true. People, they want to be heard. I want to be heard. And you don't have to do follow my opinion, but I at least want to know you heard that I said we could stack that thing differently than you're doing it, right?
Exactly.
The work is moving. That's fantastic. Okay, that's we're on 4.
That was number
5.
4. That was number 4. Number 5 is change. We live in a world today that with accelerating change, and what most leaders miss as related to change is they only address the technological aspects of it, and they ignore the emotional aspects of it. And we know you got to look at both. You got to look at what are the processes, the procedures, the dynamics that technologically we've got to address to make this change happen. But if we ignore the human system, if we ignore the human input, then we're going to meet with resistance. And neuropsychology obviously has a lot to say about managing the emotional resistance that comes along with change.
I know human beings they work maybe 30, 40 years of their lives, right? Maybe 50 if you're really lucky that you're actually working, but let's call it 30 or 40 years. And it seems like by the time everyone learns how important change and the emotional side of it is with people, they're too close to retirement. And then the next generation is unfortunately has to learn it all over again.
Yeah.
How can we get that message? And that's obviously what you're trying to do. You're trying to get that message to leaders when they're young enough, they can bring that into their working environment and not cause such a disaster by not paying attention to it.
Exactly. And I'd even extend it further, Chris, to say, all of these areas we're talking about, the sooner a leader understands these things in their career, the more effective that they can be throughout the course of their career. And it can actually take out the plateaus that you see leaders hit. We see this. I've had the opportunity to work with leaders at all different levels of organizations, lots of different industries. And we all, as leaders, we hit a plateau. I've been there myself. I've been part of that. Mm-hmm. And we can take out those plateaus by understanding that having that self-awareness, understanding how to motivate people, understanding how to be a great communicator, understanding how to build collaboration, and understanding how to move a team through change. And then that brings us to the sixth and final one, which is team dynamics. Not everybody, to your point earlier, we're not all exactly the same. We all have this unique aspect of who we are as a person. And all leaders come into their role with what I call a leadership style. This is kind of how I prefer to lead. And that style will work for many of the people on your team, but probably not everyone. And so sometimes what you have to do to navigate those team dynamics, you have to step outside of your preferred leadership style and adopt a strategy that's going to be more easily received by the followers on your team. And so again,
what's I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your last sentence. Can you give me an example of some areas, a style, say it's a style choice or flavor or whatever it is, that you do it this way, but someone doesn't like it, so you can morph it to some degree. What are you talking about? Whether they send emails or phone calls or
yeah. I mean, think about this. Think about kind of the stereotypical leader in our country today. The person who's hard driving, knows what they want done, and they're going to drive for results. It's not bad, particularly if you've got a bunch of people on your team that's what they're looking for. But right. If you've got people on your team that need a little more nurturing and need a little hand-holding, you're going to lose them. And right. It's not necessarily comfortable for those leaders to step out of that role and become more of a nurturing, guiding, supporting leader for those individuals. But, I like to say leadership, it's not about being comfortable. It's about bringing your team along with you to achieve the objectives of the team.
So Steve, on this style, I mean, again, I could ask you 50 questions on every one of these, but on the style point, how would you say, how good do you think the average leader you run into is of really understanding what their style is? It's that old thing about the fish doesn't know they're in water. Does the leader know what their style is?
I think there's great variability there. And it goes back to the self-awareness question, right? How aware am I of my style and how my style has helped me be successful, and how my style gets in my way, sometimes without even my awareness of it. And that's where some form of assessment can be really helpful to help a leader understand what motivates me as a leader, and what are the advantages to that, and where are the opportunities for me to grow, and where are the possible places that I'm maybe sabotaging my own efforts to be successful by not recognizing where I'm maybe rubbing up against some of the individuals on my team.
Wow. I'm listening, and granted, I have known you and followed what you've done for years. So this is not all brand new to me, but every time I hear you, and this is the most depth we've spent a time and a focused time going through this, it's sort of the master's degree in leadership. When people first get their leadership jobs, it's just trying to get people to come together and get some stuff done. And, you just don't think about it this way. But as you mentioned with these plateaus, you have to get this stuff better than you're currently doing it, probably, to take you to that next level, right? I mean, it's so easy to get on that plateau. When I met you, when I first came into contact with your work, I was at that plateau too. And there'll be probably more plateaus in the future. But it took the work you did and your team to get me to that next plateau. And now I'm hearing you describe it, and I'm thinking, well, thank God I came into contact with these guys. So I hope the people who are listening to that too. But I have one more question before one, because unfortunately it's a very broad question, but let me ask you anyway. As you look out of what's going on with leaders today, and that's a huge, broad subject. So let me try to narrow it down and say, what are the biggest challenges that you see that leaders are facing today where neuropsychology could have the most leverage and impact and make the biggest difference?
Wow, that is a big question. Let me answer it in two ways. One is what's on leaders' minds that neuropsychology can help with, and I would say that right now, what we're seeing in our society, in our organizations, in our country today, is this concept of quiet quitting. You've heard that before, that term?
Yeah, sure.
Quiet
Sure.
quitting. Here's the thing, Chris, it's not new. It's just another term for what the Gallup organization called engagement, or lack thereof.
Right.
And Gallup has been studying engagement for well over 15 years. And they kind of categorize people falling into three buckets. One bucket is what they call the actively engaged. And those are the folks that love their job. They're going to do whatever it takes to help the organization be successful. Then there's the not engaged. And these are the folks that kind of fit into that quiet quitting category. They're doing just enough to get by. They're not going to give any discretionary effort. They're just going to do enough to not catch the attention of their superiors. And then there's the third bucket, which is the actively disengaged. And these are the folks that are either overtly or covertly trying to sabotage the efforts of their organization.
Right.
The good news is that's a pretty small percentage that fall into that third bucket. The bad news is anywhere from 65 to 70% of the people fall into that not engaged,
right,
or quiet quitting category. And here's the thing, Chris, that's, for me, that's astounding. This has been going on for 15 years, and we still have not solved that problem.
No.
In spite of the fact that leaders have said, we got to build engagement, they haven't been able to do so. And I think there's two reasons for that. And that's going to kind of be the answer to your question here, which is, what's the biggest challenge that neuropsychology can help leaders with? And it goes back to that: how do you motivate people? How do you create that engaging environment that allows people to give discretionary effort, that helps them motivate themselves? And it all comes down to building relationship skills. How do I build the relationship skills and build an environment that motivates people and gets them into that actively engaged group where they're interested in the success of the team and the organization?
Okay, I don't have many psychologist jokes, but here's one. How many psychologists does it take to change a light bulb? Right? And the answer is, it only takes one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. It's the only joke I know. And the reason I bring it up is, when I came and saw you and your colleagues, what I realized in my journey, and everyone's journey is unique, but what I really realized in my journey was, unless I understood my own desire and reason and motivation to be a better leader, it wasn't going to happen. Right? It's like going to an exercise class. If you really don't want to get into shape, you can sit in an exercise class and not get in shape, right? Or buy a piece of, exercise equipment or whatever. So as you're dealing with these leaders, and you've over the years, you've met these folks, and as you see them today, how do you sort through, does this person really want to get better at what we're talking about?
Yeah, I kind of classify clients that I work with in three areas. One is what you might call the high potentials, right? These are the folks, they want to get better, they want to improve, they want feedback. They're going to do whatever it is you tell them would be helpful to build their leadership. They're going to go do it.
Right.
Those are fun people to work with.
Yay.
The second group, the second group are those that they're interested and they're kind of like, yeah, this is I could benefit from this, and they're going to do most of what the action plan is. And my experience with those leaders is when they begin to experience positive results from their efforts, they actually move into category one. They
move into one, right.
They become the high performers, right? But I really enjoy working with category three. Those folks that say, you know what, I am who I am, and what you see is what you get. I'm not interested in changing. And what I have found is that with the proper feedback, when these individuals understand how they're limiting their own career, their own success, and their organization and team success, their motivation shifts and they begin to look at, okay, maybe I'm missing something here. Goes back to that whole self-awareness thing. And how do I get off this plateau that I've been on, maybe in some cases for years? Right. And it comes to sometimes you kind of got to, what I call, shock the system. And you got to give these people some really brutal, honest feedback coming from their team. And they got to begin to see where their shortcomings are. And when that happens, it can be really rewarding to work with those types of individuals.
I know this is not the same analogy, but you hear when people have, addiction, chemical addiction problems, that they have to hit rock bottom. And I've also heard that extreme narcissists have to hit rock bottom. Like they have to blow up something in their life. An alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever has to blow up something in their life. And of course, leadership's not as clear like that. Although you can get fired from a pretty big job, or you can miss out on a big promotion, or you can finally wake up one day and say, it can't be everybody else's problem. It must be partly mine. Right? This is just going that well. Well, look, hey, this is fantastic. I don't even know how long we spent on this call, but it is absolutely great to go through it. But at the end, I want to say two things. First, thank you so much for taking the time to go through this. I can't wait to actually read your book when it's available. And I know we got some time coming on that. We'll probably talk a few times between now and then. But if someone wants to reach out, talk to you, make contact, find anything that you're working on, what's the best way for someone to reach you?
Well, I'll tell you, the very best thing and the easiest thing is to go look at my blog. I have a blog called The Neuropsychology of Leadership, and you can find it. Yep, The Neuropsychology of Leadership, and you can find it at the neuropsychologyofleadership.com. The
Neuropsychology of Leadership. And A+ to anybody who can spell that right the first time without looking it up on Google. The Neuropsychology of Leadership. Steve Swavely, PhD, great inspirer of leaders, great and small. Thank you so much for taking the time to go through this. I was going to say I'd wish you luck, but I'm going to keep contacting you anyway, and we're going to talk along the way. I hope anyone who listens and watches this benefited from what Steve, I know, Steve, you could only say part, you only had time to cover pieces of the work.
Tiny bit.
As a huge endorser, and I mean this sincerely, with no money changing hands in any way, shape, or form, my experience with you and your content more than 10 years ago was, and I have told the story many, many times since then, what my major breakthrough was when it occurred when I was at your session. And I think anyone else who feels like you've hit a plateau. Why am I not going to whatever the next thing? That's when you can really start asking those questions. And that certainly happened to me. And I want to thank you personally for what the benefit that has meant years later. So thank you very much, Steve. And I hope they find you at say it again.
The Neuropsychology of Leadership steve@neuropsychology.com.
And if you get that right the first time, let us know and we'll take you to dinner. I will anyway. Steve,
Thank you so
very
much, Chris. I really enjoy, again, I love talking about this stuff. So I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
It is patently obvious how passionate you are about this subject. All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody.